Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We have a couple of guests with us I'm going to introduce in just a minute. As you all know, our nation's facing unprecedented challenges, and Speaker Pelosi continues every single day to turn away from bipartisan solutions to these challenges that we face. Instead, on every single issue, whether it's police reform, health care, infrastructure, she continues to introduce legislation that she knows will never become law. But these are all areas in which the American people expect us to work together in a bipartisan fashion to come up with solutions. Today, we've got yet one more missed opportunity, the Democrats' transportation bill, which we're going to hear more from Mr. Davis in just a minute. But this legislation is, quote, an application of the principles of the Green New Deal, when it doesn't need to be that, when there is bipartisan room for agreement on it. The Democrats also, we've watched, pass legislation yesterday that actually will make it much more difficult to come up with the kind of innovation that is necessary for vaccines, for treatments, for COVID. So their determination to move and to operate in a partisan fashion is fundamentally hurting the people of this country. On Russian activities in Afghanistan, Ranking Member Thornberry is here to discuss that as well as actions this week on the NDAA. Let me just say, we're not going to talk about classified briefings. We're not going to talk about the specifics of any of those classified briefings. But as Ranking Member Thornberry and I said yesterday in our statement, we remain concerned about Russian activities in Afghanistan and around the world. We're going to continue to work with the administration. We anticipate additional briefings on this issue. But I want to be absolutely clear that America's adversaries should know, and they should have no doubt, that any targeting of U.S. forces by Russians, by anyone else, will face a very swift and deadly response. The Russians experienced this in Syria in 2018 when U.S. forces defended themselves with overwhelming and lethal force against likely Russian mercenary forces. In the United States, we have a free and open society. We debate policy, we debate these issues. That is the strength of our system. And that is what our adversaries, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans among them, that is what they fear the most. Those governments cannot allow their people the kind of free and open debate we have, because they know if they allow their people to choose, they would lose power. America's adversaries should never question the will of the United States government or of the American people to defend our interests, to protect the security of our nation, to protect our forces, and to respond when attacked or threatened. With that, I'd like to yield to the Republican leader of the House Armed Services Committee, Mr. Thornberry.
Thank you, Liz. Tomorrow, the House Armed Services Committee will have our full committee markup of this year's National Defense Authorization Bill. Last week, we had each of the subcommittees mark up their portion of the bill. Amendments were offered by members of both parties, adopted, the bill was changed. And several hundred amendments have been offered for the markup that starts tomorrow. At this point, there is a genuine good faith effort on both sides to have a bill that both sides can support. And if that holds true tomorrow and through the floor, there is a very good chance that we will have the 60th consecutive year where a National Defense Authorization Bill has been signed into law. And I got to highlight that because it is the exception to the rule in a House that is largely dysfunctional, as Liz was saying and as Rodney will further illustrate. So far, in this area this year, we're able to work together, but that's the way it ought to work every year. And I would just highlight for you, a report just came out today that shows for the first time in several years, military aircraft accidents are headed down. They were going up, up, up. We worked together. We passed legislation to deal with it, and now they are going down. fewer lives are being lost because of it. That's just an example of what's at stake and why a Congress ought to be able to function for the best interests of the people. We're the exception so far, and I'll knock on wood, rather than the rule. And I would just say briefly, as Liz mentioned, part of the reason we're the exception is because national security and the safety and well-being of our troops is a dominant priority. And that has got to be the dominant priority when it comes to the Russian Taliban matter that's been in the press. A lot of different agendas, a lot of different issues are getting talked about, but what matters most, what's central, is the safety of our troops. And that means that every level of government needs to gather more information to understand this situation better. Measures have to be taken to make sure our troops are protected, but also measures taken to make sure when troops are sent on a mission, they have what they need to be successful in that mission. And as Liz said, the Armed Services Committee, and I'm sure other committees, are going to continue to pursue this issue to gain greater insight and clarity, but at the top of the priority list is the safety and well-being of our military forces.
Thanks, everyone. Chair Mac Thornberry and Chair Cheney are correct. Our troops should never be used as part of a political gamesmanship. And certainly the best thing we can do for our troops is to have what Ranking Member Thornberry said is possible in the Armed Services Committee, and that is a bipartisan agreement. That could have been done months ago. I was in the room when Leader McCarthy laid out to Majority Leader Hoyer a plan for all of us to come back, debate in a very bipartisan way, the NDAA and also a surface transportation bill. It was a very well thought out and very well laid out plan of action that the Democrat majority just disposed of. And here we are today with Congress's Infrastructure Week, and all we have is a partisan bill that was walking through a partisan process that will lead to a partisan vote on the House floor. This bill is not a bipartisan surface transportation bill as we've seen in years before. In my 16 years I spent as a congressional staffer before being elected and working on a surface bill, I've never been a part of one process that has been so one-sided. This is a bill that is only part surface transportation. I actually feel bad for Chairman DeFazio because during the middle of a 24-hour markup over 2 days, the Democrat leadership brought him and other chairmen into this room and airdropped another $1 trillion in spending that makes $2 out of every $5 spent in this bill that we're going to vote on this week go towards accomplishing the goals of the new Green Deal. That is not what our local communities and our local states want or need. They need money to rebuild our crumbling roads and bridges. The NDAA and the Surface Transportation Bill are two pieces of legislation that should never be partisan in this Congress. But unfortunately, we Republicans were left out of the process, and it's very disappointing for somebody like me who asked Ranking Member Graves to appoint me to be Ranking Member of Highways and Transit, knowing we had a surface bill coming forward. And instead of working together, creating four corners agreements like Chairman Schuster did in the past, unfortunately, we were saddled with 24 hours of debate, argument, and Republicans getting told no at every turn. It's disappointing, but unsurprising in this new Democratic majority. And I'll yield to Whip Scalise.
Thank you, Rodney. It's very unfortunate that Speaker Pelosi has chosen to waste this entire Congress pushing a far-left socialist agenda. And today's no different. This is Pelosi's My Way or the Highway bill, which should have been a surface transportation bill where all sides work together. She continues to go it alone and literally say it's her way or the highway. Instead of helping our communities rebuild their infrastructure, she's focused on trying to push the radical Green New Deal, this agenda item from the socialist left that would much rather focus on making airplanes have to put solar panels on their wings than allow the airline industry to come back, for example. We should be focused on building roads and bridges, not on passing an agenda that would raise energy prices for all hardworking families across this country. Something else that was just perplexing yesterday that Speaker Pelosi brought to the floor was a bill on government price controls. Now think about this. We are in the middle of battling a global pandemic. We're trying to safely open up our economy again, getting people back to work again, safely going back to doing the things they did before, like getting their exam, their immunizations, their colonoscopies and mammograms. And we're trying to find a cure for COVID-19. We're trying to find a vaccine for COVID-19, and everybody's working at warp speed. President Trump set up Operation Warp Speed to find a cure for COVID-19. And you would think here in Congress we would be helping support that initiative, but that's not what Speaker Pelosi did yesterday. She brought a bill that, according to the Council of Economic Advisors, would actually reduce by 100 the number of new life-saving drugs that came to the market. Getting rid of up to 100 life-saving drugs. Just imagine, as we're trying to find a cure for COVID-19, Speaker Pelosi brought a bill to the floor yesterday that would make it harder to find a cure for COVID-19. Every estimate that's come out has said it would be harder to bring new drugs like a COVID-19 vaccine to the market, and yet that's what she wasted the House's floor time on. What world are they living in, and what crises are they trying to address when they're going to make it harder, not easier, but harder to find a cure for COVID-19, passing a partisan piece of legislation like that? Once again, Speaker Pelosi's way or the highway, not wanting to work with Republicans to solve problems, actually making it harder to do things like find a cure and a vaccine for COVID-19. It's just mind-boggling that this is what her agenda is, but it should be eye-opening to everybody. That's her approach. Clearly, it's the Joe Biden approach to push a radical socialist agenda. And if you want to know just what's at stake, you can look at the incredibly disappointing decision by the United States Supreme Court yesterday on the Louisiana law that was set up to improve safety standards for women. You look at the bill that the court struck down yesterday. It was a bill that moved through the Louisiana legislature with a very bipartisan coalition. The lead author was a Democrat. The governor who signed the bill was a Democrat, and the court struck it down not because women brought forward a case saying they're having a harder time getting access to health care. No, it was actually an abortion provider who brought the case because he didn't want to follow higher safety standards for women. And I'm so disappointed that Justice Roberts flip-flopped on this case. Just 4 years ago, he actually upheld a similar law. But yesterday, he chose to not uphold his oath to the Constitution, because as a Supreme Court justice, your oath is to uphold the Constitution and follow it as it's written, not to move around with the winds of change. And yet that's what he did. He upheld the prior failed rulings of the Supreme Court instead of upholding the Constitution in his ruling in a 5-4 decision that was a defeat for women's health standards. It's incredibly disappointing, but it shows what's at stake this November. And with that now, I want to introduce our leader, Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning. I want to thank Rodney for his service. I want to thank Mac Thornberry. Mac, the men and women in our military are better protected because of your service in Congress. The work you have done when you speak of the planes being able to fly more now, the accidents being less, it wasn't because of work that was done this year. It was work you did as a chairman that you put the emphasis back into the protection of our men and women. I thank you for that, your service to that. If you wonder why Speaker Pelosi would carry on another 45 days of shadow voting, it simply gives her more power. If you wonder what the outcome to doing that is, you listen to Rodney Davis today. It does not matter what happens in committee, because you can add $1 trillion afterwards if you're Nancy Pelosi. Why? Because you hold all the votes in your pocket. Members of the Democrat Party are happy because they don't have to work, but they still get paid. They don't have to show up, and they still get paid. They could sign a letter that says they are physically unable to be here and get in their car and go enjoy whatever event they have within their district. They can look at the agenda and say it's not much, I guess I will stay home. Those are all quotes from why Democrats signed a letter that said they were physically unable to be here, not work, and still capture a check. The sad part is the people who lose in this are the American public. The American public believed in the election system, that they would loan their power to an individual, that they would have a voice in Congress, that they'd have a voice in committee, that one person would not hold all the power. But lo and behold, the Democrats abused their power to create shadow voting, and they've just extended it for another 45 days. That's why, when we're in the middle of COVID, when we should be investing in more research and development to find more cures, every study tells us with the Democrats' bill, there'll be fewer cures in the future. But where's the voice to have be spoken? The only voice that comes on the floor is a few Democrats who yell out the voice of a member who's sitting at home being paid on what they think they would vote. I believe Congress is essential. I believe the voice of your constituents is essential to be heard and to be spoken. But unfortunately, in this Congress, it is not. As we continue to move forward, there's much the American public expects us to get done. We're making progress when it's coming to testing, more than 600,000 a day, more than 31 million. We've watched COVID continue to begin to rise in other states, and we watched many protests just 2 weeks ago, shoulder to shoulder. We knew this day would come. We will have to deal with it, and we will. We continue to watch the new therapies coming on board and the progress being made in vaccines. The work when it comes to BARDA, the government's being able to invest with them. So when that final stage comes, that the dosage will be there for all Americans. But on the Democrat side, we continue to see the same thing. More accusations, more selective leaking. Instead of taking the concern of the American public with the American servicemen and women, not to play politics with something, to make sure you get all the information. But what you do? You rush to a press conference to selectively say stuff that you can't talk about all. I think the protection of our men and women who serve in the military is too important to play politics with. It's too important to play one side over the other. And it's one that we should all sit together. Because I believe any American that's threatened by any nation, that nation will have consequences. Severe. And that should not be a political issue whatsoever. With that, let me open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Representative Cheney and Ranking Member Thornberry. You were at the White House yesterday. Do you want a briefing by intelligence leaders such as Gina Haspel as well?
Yeah, just to be clear, there were other lines. Of course I do. And I think you will see, certainly from our committee, an attempt to continue to push the intelligence community to discover everything they can possibly find out about any threat to our service members, but particularly if a nation state is putting a bounty on their heads, we should leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, I would just associate myself with Mac's comments. There were intelligence professionals there yesterday, and we will continue, obviously, on the Armed Services Committee to work to get additional information and absolutely ensure that there are ramifications, when we find out that other nations are targeting our forces.
Intelligence data or anything of the sort, intelligence data that you might not have gotten yet or seen?
We're continuing to work with the administration, continuing to work with the intelligence community. Would anticipate that additional information will be forthcoming, as well as additional briefings.
Let's be very clear. Nobody on this side believes Russia is good players. That's why when we had a new administration, we changed from the resetting. Ukraine received weapons, something the Obama administration would not. They received blankets under Obama. We've got more sanctions against Russia than any other time. This president's entire focus on rebuilding this military and the advancements that he's put into it. His goal is to make sure every man and woman is safe. I've been with this president when we've gone to Dover. I've watched his face. I've watched him console families. I've spoken with him at night when he has to call families. I will tell you, it is his top priority. And the idea that someone would try to do something selective inside a report to play games is unacceptable. It doesn't matter what party you are in. And we should not play any games with this. And no member should do that as well. You know, when we look at the world today, we watch China, a land far away, change the entire world by a lie of what was going on with COVID. Thousands of people have now died. And in this process, as other countries are dealing with COVID, what is happening? We watch them break their word one more time. When they signed a treaty of how Hong Kong would be governed in the middle of this. When July 1st comes, the world will be different for those in Hong Kong. The freedom will be smaller and be less. So for those millions of people in Hong Kong that would stand out in the rain with an umbrella to crave the idea of America, of freedom, that has now ended. So when we sit in this 4th of July, and yes, it will be different than those in the past. We will not be as close. We will not have as many families gathered with us. But that same spirit of who we are will even be tested and be stronger. America is more than a country. We are an idea. And any country that wants to challenge us on that will soon learn what others have found in the past, that they will lose. Freedom is much stronger than what they believe in. And nobody will stand for any report of somebody going after our servicemen and women with any bounty.
Do you question the legitimacy of the report, or is that?
No, I know a number of people in the intelligence community do. I happen to be a member of the Gang of Eight. I think from a standpoint of how to approach this, I listened to some that were on the other side of the aisle that are a part of the Gang of Eight, one individual member, and what he would say, I think was wrong. Let's have the intel community walk through this all and not deal with selective and impress of how, because you put men and women in danger if you do that. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Leader McCarthy, as a member of the Gang of Eight, did you have any briefings, you don't have to comment on the details about this before the
No.
New York Times report?
No, none.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about the infrastructure bill that's going through this week, probably tomorrow. So you said that it was partisan, but I know that Chairman Neal has had conversations with Secretary Mnuchin. So do you anticipate that the administration?
Chairman Neal is Ways and Means.
Right, but they're all working together. They're all
Okay.
sponsors
So
of the movement.
let me tell you the story that I had a meeting with Steny Hoyer. And to the majority leader I met this week, and I talked about the transportation bill. I said, it's very partisan. He said, yes, it is. That's just the way it's going to be. Anytime you add $1 trillion that wasn't put in committee, no one could ever do that unless you change the voting system of Congress and you put the power into one. Just as no way has Congress ever moved a $3 trillion bill with nothing else going on, with only one office writing it, which Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, was able to do. Why? She's harnessed all the power. The sad part is members of her own party has allowed her to do that. They have gone against what they told their constituents, that they would speak for them and vote for them. Instead, just in his shadow voting, they handed their vote for what's in the back of her pocket. So it doesn't matter what happens in committees, even if it's zoomed far away where people can't even participate. That's the difference that has happened. Yes.
McCarthy? Does the surge in cases of coronavirus make Republicans more amenable to revisiting some of the stimulus measures in the CARES Act, extending unemployment benefits, for example?
Well, I'll tell you something it doesn't do for anybody. If you watch the Democrat $3 trillion bill where it mentioned cannabis more than it mentioned jobs, I don't think anyone wants to go back to that because it didn't go anywhere else. That was a very partisan bill. But in the CARES Act, you watch what the Republicans had done in that bill. Remember where that bill started. It started with Republicans in the Senate and the Republicans in the House working together. When that bill was ready to move forward, when Schumer even credited with that bill, and I flew back on a red eye, we had a meeting. Why did that bill stop? Nancy Pelosi. She stopped the CARES Act. So there are certain things in the CARES Act we probably wouldn't revisit. We wouldn't revisit the things that Nancy Pelosi put in, like more money for the arts, more money for the Kennedy Center. Those things that were held up for more than a week that people needed help for, that she put in, were real challenging. So I don't think we'll look back to that. But yes, you know things that we will look to going forward? We need to get our schools and our child care open. How can we do that safely? Well, I'll say some of the first things you really need to do is liability protection for so many small businesses. I was just with a small business the other day. The pain that they are having to be able to bring people back that are making more money in unemployment than able to have a job. We want incentive. We want all Americans to work. So our focus is to rebuild, to renew, and restore America. And that's what we've been working on, and we plan to work through with those who want to work with us. And we believe at the end of the day that would become law. So I thank you for your time.
Are you open at all to extending the unemployment benefits that
I
expired?
don't think it's productive to extend the added money from the federal government. We're finding numerous people. I've had conversations with Democrats on the other side of the aisle from their own constituency hearing it as well, that it's becoming a hardship for individuals to be able to go back to work. I think the greatest incentive here is let's help people get back to work in a safe manner. Let's make sure the resources that we put in, which were very productive when it goes to the NIH and CDC. Fortunately, when we were in the majority, we had increased funding by more than 40% into those entities, and also created infectious disease rapid response fund. But every day we learn something new about this virus. Every single day. And the sad part about all of this, if China had just been open and honest, we could have contained it. We probably would have saved thousands of lives of China that they don't even report that they have lost. But think of all the thousands of lives across this world that would have been saved, that we could have contained it. As we sit and celebrate our freedoms and cherish them on this 4th of July, there will be family members who can't be there. They're not there by something that had happened to America. It was because China lied to the world. And so I think in this holiday, we should cherish a little greater our freedoms. We should cherish our families a little stronger. And let's make sure that we rebuild, restore, and renew America to be greater than it's ever been before. Thank you.